Taos in Baltimore, and for the big shoe to drop, and who are they going to sign, and who are they going to lose, and tampering, pre-tampering, the real signing period, all here. And Luke Jones has been monitoring all of this, which in the era of Twitter is not all that hard to do. And honestly, Luke, this is not like the bidding war of the old baseball, free agency where player A would get on the plane and fly to Cleveland, then he'd fly to Philadelphia, then he'd fly to Boston, then he'd fly. None of that goes on. I mean, all of this is done, as you and I pointed out, behind the scenes in Indianapolis, at Senior Bowls, with agents, on phones, via fax, email, Twitter, all that stuff. And it really feels like before the free agency period begins, you get a real solid lay of the land, and there aren't a whole lot of rumors or moving around or leveraging. It's more like take the most amount of money and go, and cut your Austin Howards and your Danny Woodheads and go. And, most of these teams have a hell of a strategy heading into this week, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly say whether it's a smart strategy or not for many of these teams, the Ravens included, quite frankly, and we'll get into that in a few moments. But we've talked about this. I mean, we talk about it at the Combine. It goes on before the Combine, tampering, whatever you want to call it. Speaking in generalities, speaking in hypotheticals, I mean, these agents and teams have been talking for a long time. And you open up the quote, legal tampering window, and it's no surprise that these deals are getting done because they're quite far down the road already by the time the tampering window opens up. So it's very clear, in this day and age, you don't have players taking a ton of free agent visits. Kirk Cousins, I know there was talk about him taking a visit to Minnesota, and then it sounded like there was a deal. So
sounded like he took I saw his Minnesota visit. He walked past our booth.
Right.
He spent a week in Minnesota 4 weeks ago, right?
Yeah,
literally.
And that's actually interesting. I think I heard something that he has family there. I think his sister lives there, or I heard something along those lines. Maybe I'm confusing him with.
And Rick Spielman just happened to show up at his cousin's place,
yeah,
right?
Right. but it's very clear that teams that have cap room to spend, they are spending it, and even teams who didn't have a whole lot of cap room, like the Ravens, they are spending theirs. So. It's very interesting. It hasn't even just been the top 10 free agents, the top 15 free agents. I mean, you're seeing players that haven't even been listed in top 50s, in top 100 free agent lists at the various websites and publications. Even players like that have gotten deals. So, needless to say, the official start of free agency has really become anticlimactic because there's upwards of 50 to 60 deals out there that have already been, I guess, not officially executed because, heaven forbid, that wouldn't be allowed. But we know that there are 50 or 60 deals out there that are all but official, just need the official signature and to be turned into the league.
All right, well, let's go one by one. Ravens side on this. Look, the notion of Jarvis Landry at $16 million, and, I started seeing the numbers come off the board for the Allen Robinsons, and as I tweeted, no thanks. I don't know that that's really an answer, bringing in your next version of Mike Wallace or Torrey Smith or someone who's going to be adequate, and I don't want to be disrespectful to any of these guys catching 40, 50, 60 balls a year in the league because I haven't done it, but, a difference maker and adequate, I can't pay $16 million for somebody that's not a difference maker. I don't want to pay $12 million for somebody that's adequate. Paying $5 million for somebody that you're just basically trying to get on the field, which is what I guess what John Brown and Ryan Grant are at this point. Have they upgraded? I don't know. I mean, they've kind of gone sideways, but they also didn't break the bank. I don't know what to make of this other than the speculation of these guys better be better here than they were in Arizona or Washington in order for the Ravens to win football games.
Well, I'll be totally honest with you, Nestor. I'm stunned. This is as surprising and let me get this out of the way first. I actually like the John Brown signing for what it is. It's 1 year. $5 million, which compared to many of the free agent deals that wide receivers have gotten, that's a prove-it deal.
And he has caught 60 balls.
And he has been a 1,000-yard receiver in the past. I mean, John Brown in Arizona in 2015 looked like he was on his way to becoming the Cardinals' future number one receiver once Larry Fitzgerald hangs it up.
And there's two words. Well, it's two words for that. Larry Fitzgerald. The other two words would be, Carson Palmer, right? So,
sure.
If having a good quarterback, having a good offense, having a running game, having a defense to get you the ball back, all of that stuff, matters in especially for wide receivers where everything else has to go right for you to catch a ball, right?
Right. And Torrey Smith's a great example of that, of what he was in Baltimore and what he hasn't been since then. But I think in the case of John Brown, you at least know that there's some upside there. I think there's a relatively high ceiling there, but the thing with him the last couple of years has been his health. He has the sickle cell trait, which anyone who's familiar with that knows that it really makes recovering from injuries difficult. He's had hamstring issues. He's had quad issues, all kinds of stuff. Now, he played 15 games in 2016. He played 10 games this past year. But even games where he's been playing, the word is not 100%, and has really kind of limped through injuries, and that's why he only had 517 yards 2 years ago, and last year 21 catches for 299 yards. So I think in the case of John Brown, there's some intrigue. I think there is some upside there. There's a low floor as well. If he can't get on the field and stay on the field, I think very clearly that's not going to be a deal that is going to work out if that's the case. But he's 5'11", 179 pounds. He's really fast, and again, as we pointed out, he at least is formally a 1,000-yard receiver. Ryan Grant, who the Ravens, I believe, other than the original extension they gave Anquan Boldin, Ryan Grant received the richest contract in franchise history for a wide receiver, other than that Boldin deal, reported to be 4 years, $29 million, 14.5 of that guaranteed. And this guy doesn't even have 1,000 yards in his career. In his 4 years total in Washington, he is at 84 catches for 985 yards. Now, he improved this past year. He was in a wide receiver group that was led by Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson until this past season. So it's not as though this isn't a player who's shown some growth. But in his, quote, breakout season that fetched him this contract, 45 catches for 573 yards and 4 touchdowns. I mean, this guy had slightly better numbers than Jeremy Maclin last year. I mean, what am I missing? I really am quite frankly stunned by this deal. And, you mentioned Allen Robinson, you mentioned Sammy Watkins, and look, I'm not saying Allen Robinson's cheap, but at least you know you're getting someone who has very legitimate number one potential and had a 1,400-yard season a couple years ago. I'm frankly stunned by the Ryan Grant move. I don't get it. I think he's a nice player, but you look at that production, that screams value signing 2 weeks after the start of free agency. So unless the Ravens are really, really, really smart and they've really evaluated this guy to be something that he's never shown himself to be, quite frankly, I don't get it.
You know what I thought? Maybe he was a kid that they loved on draft. You know what I mean? A guy they fell in love with that thought was misused or whatever. There's a lot of splaining to do. I would agree with that. And then you go into this draft 6 weeks from now, and to your point, like whoever the number 16 pick is, Ridley, DJ Moore, you pick your wide receiver. You don't anticipate that guy to be a difference maker, but you want to have a place on the field for him to some degree too, without having spent $10 million on wide receivers already before you go to the draft. And I mean, I'm kind of speechless on this. I mean, I can't make a case for a guy who's never made a case for himself, right?
I mean, this guy has never even had a 100-yard game at the NFL level, let alone being a 1,000-yard receiver or catching 8 or 9 touchdowns in a season. I mean, look, I'm not saying Ryan Grant can't play football, but I don't see this being the right player or the right price. I mean, this is, if you're going to overspend on somebody, go overspend on Allen Robinson, which, look, the way that deal was structured and where they were from a cap standpoint, that wasn't going to happen, especially with a lot of these guys taking 3-year deals. And Albert Breer pointed this out. I thought it was a really interesting point. You're seeing all these 3-year contracts being executed. That's because in 3 years, new CBA comes up,
right.
And certainly you would expect that there could be some changes as far as how the revenue is distributed. So I mean, this is, and you know this, and look, I mean, Ozzie Newsome and Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh and this organization has built up a lot of credit over the years, and they've had a ton of success. And even some of these drafts in recent years that have turned out to be not so good, they were universally praised at the time because that's what kind of reputation that this organization has around the league and with pundits and reporters and analysts and other front offices. The Ryan Grant signing, I can't recall the Ravens ever having a signing that was universally mocked and criticized and just people being baffled and stunned by it. So, like I said, maybe they're smarter than everyone else. I know what their reputation and what their history is at the wide receiver position, and that would tell me that I don't like this deal. But maybe they do know something about him that everyone else doesn't know. But, man, I mean, you're talking about a guy who his career numbers are inferior to Kamar Aiken's career numbers, and the Ravens just are going to pay this guy over $7 million a year. I mean, it's just I'm really surprised by it, and quite frankly, I mean,
well, he was kind of the last guy standing, though, too, right? I mean, I don't know what the next rung under that becomes.
Mike Wallace.
Fair enough.
Terrell Pryor's another name out there. I mean, this guy, if you go and look at some of these different lists, top 50 free agents, top 100 free agents.
Not even on
these lists. I mean, and look, that's not to say that these lists are gospel. These lists are made by people like you and me, quite frankly. We're not NFL executives, so that's not to say that he's not better than some of the other wide receivers that have signed, and maybe even better than some of the receivers who got more money than him. But I think you looked at so many of these deals that were just players coming flying off the board on Tuesday. The Paul Richardsons and frankly some other guys that I've never even heard of before. But this deal's right there with those. I mean, this is the kind of deal the Ravens and their fans generally mock.
He's kind of like sort of their Brashad Perryman, kind of, sort of, right?
Well, I mean, it's not a first-round pick. I mean,
but I mean, the productivity level.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, what he did this past year is not now, he had more receptions, but in terms of receiving yardage, it's not terribly far off than what Perriman did in 2016. Perriman had, I think, 499 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns off the top of my head. I think that's what he had.
Well, he did come on last year. He caught 45 balls in 7 starts, right?
Yeah, I mean, he came on. I mean, like I said, if this was someone they signed a week and a half from now and said that he was going to be their number 3 wide receiver, and they got him for pennies on the dollar, then you'd say, wow, that could be a Corey Graham kind of signing. But they gave this guy real money. They gave this guy real guaranteed money, and I'm really surprised by it. The John Brown deal, it's a 1-year deal. It's worth $5 million. With some incentives, he could make $6.5 million. There's a little bit of a track record there of him actually being a really productive player. He got a 1-year deal and didn't get any kind of a real guarantee beyond that because of the injuries and health concerns that he has that are legitimate. In the case of Ryan Grant, I mean, I'm frankly fascinated to hear and I know what they're going to say.
I don't hear you speechless much, dude.
Right.
Usually you can explain things, and like I said, they got a lot of explaining to do. We're explaining it today, but they're going to have to explain it tomorrow, right?
I mean, this is a deal that frankly has the potential on paper. I kind of feel like I felt when the Orioles signed Ubaldo Jimenez, quite frankly. And Jimenez at least had been an all-star and had been a really...
Yeah, you wouldn't have said that if they gave Nelson Cruz $56 million after hitting 50 home runs, right? You would have said, well, are you okay? At least he did it once, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't... And look, I know Ryan Grant was really a favorite of Jay Gruden in Washington to the point where his nickname was Ryan Gruden because Gruden spoke so glowingly of him as far as being a hard worker and a good practice player, and obviously being so close to the DC media, plenty of DC media chimed in, and a number of them said the same thing. This guy's a nice player and popular with teammates, but they were all just completely floored at the idea that the Ravens have made him a $7 million a year football player. And
Well,
again,
if that's the going rate, if Allen Robinson's $14 million, then I don't like. I mean, literally,
but Allen Robinson.
I'm with you, but to go think you're going to go into the draft and draft 3 kids here in the first, third, and 6th rounds and have wide receivers, that's not true either, right?
Well, that's very, very fair. But at the same time, I mean, they're paying this guy at least. And I know it's a very low bar, and they haven't exactly gone out and paid a lot of receivers, but based on what they've paid wide receivers, they're looking at this guy to be their number 1 wide receiver. I mean,
well, they're not going to pay anybody more than they're paying him, right?
I wouldn't. I mean, they don't have the cap room. I mean, unless they decide they're hanging on to Jeremy Maclin, which they're going to need that $5 million at this point, because I would assume they're not done completely in free agency. But I'm interested to hear what they're going to have to say, but nothing they can possibly say is going to sell anyone on this until Ryan Grant goes out there and shows he can be a 1,000-yard receiver. I mean, quite frankly.
Do you think they're paying him to be Wallace or what Wallace has been for the next 3 or 4 years, saying, dude, you're 27, Wallace is not 27, we want that 27, 28, 29-year kind of productivity, which to him, I guess what they're paying him for, he caught 45 balls in 7 starts last year. He was a bit of a bit roll guy that sort of became more than that because Gruden liked him or whatever, that they would say, in our offense, in our way, you're going to catch 4 balls a week over 16 games, which is, 60 catches that we believe that $7 million a year, that's what a 50 to 65 catch guy would be in our offense. Not the 90 catch, not 1,400 yards, but, 60 catches, 800 yards, sort of that guy who's out there for every snap, who will be healthy, who's coming into a better spot in their career, that guy that, much like every other wide receiver, kind of sort of stinks the first or second or third year trying to figure it out. They've obviously been speculative on him. Now, I'm just trying to play the role of Eric DeCosta or George Kokinis or Ozzie Newsome or even John Harbaugh to say, Coach down there loved him. He's become a better player. We wish that Perryman were tracking in this direction. You know what I mean? If that's where this thing we're tracking with Perryman, we would feel good about him. I don't know what else to say, but you weren't going to get him cheaper than that, right? I mean, he was a guy, if you weren't going to give him the money, somebody else was. And then the Jordy Nelson thing happens, and, these other names start to buzz about because he won't be the first or last wide receiver on the market right now, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess someone else would have given him this money. I mean, but for years, I mean, we've talked about the Ravens in terms of not being that team that just gives in the free agency and goes out and signs inferior players for great money. And it's funny, I was earlier in the day, I was completely mocking the Miami Dolphins because they gave Albert Wilson a 3-year, $24 million contract on Tuesday afternoon. This was a guy that, quite frankly, until going through some free agent lists over the last few weeks as we're counting down to the start of free agency, I'd never heard of the guy before. He's a guy who has never had more than 554 yards in a season. So I was mocking that and saying, my goodness, as much as I want to see the Ravens actually care about the wide receiver position and try to get better at that position, I certainly don't want them to go out and sign an Albert Wilson. And then they sign Ryan Grant a few hours later. I mean, we'll see. We will see. Like I said, unless the Ravens are just that much smarter when it comes to evaluating this specific player, and to get back to your question about comparing them to Mike Wallace, I think the John Brown's the closer comparison to Mike Wallace because he's a fast guy, he's a speed guy, a big play guy. Ryan Grant's more of a possession kind of receiver. Probably they're hoping he can be a better version of what Jeremy Maclin was this past year, but I don't know. I understand that the wide receiver market has been crazy, but does that really mean that you go out and sign a guy who really hasn't done anything in his career to a 4-year, $29 million contract and give him a $10 million signing bonus and $14.5 guaranteed? I mean, it's just, I'm really, really surprised by the Ryan Grant signing. The John Brown signing, I'm fine with it. I'm not doing cartwheels over it, but for what it is, I think there's some potential for that to be a nice signing. For what this looks like on paper, unless I mean, I certainly get that they think he's an ascending player, an improving player, but he better ascend here very quickly because you're paying that much money for a guy who had 573 yards last year. I really, really don't get it. And for the money that they've spent on these two, I don't know if these guys are as good as Jeremy Maclin and Mike Wallace, let alone better, which is, they better be better considering the money they're paying these guys compared to what they were spending on Wallace and Maclin. So I guess the kind way to put it is the jury is certainly out and is going to be out deliberating on this one for a long time, really until Ryan Grant gets on the field and proves that this investment was even remotely close to being worth it.
Let's get out to the rest of the league because, I guess more than anything else, everything affects everything. Jimmy Graham's buzzing around at one point. We've talked so much about Robinson and before that Landry, and it always sort of ticks down the next best available guy. Clearly the quarterbacks have scattered, right? I mean, and that all started with Cousins to Minnesota, Keenum to Denver, Bradford to Arizona. I mean, it has been the Breeze Saints thing. There's another $50 million they throw at him. There's been a lot of pre-activity here above and beyond. It's been kind of fun to watch the NFL Network the last couple of days just to see all the stuff that's happening around the league because it is much more so than I thought about this with baseball and how the Orioles have screwed the pooch here in the offseason and a lot of teams. There hasn't been a lot of excitement for baseball to sell over the last 4 months. Boy, in the last 6 days there's been a lot of excitement in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think we've seen this become more and more the case. I mean, from the time that they introduced this tampering window, this negotiating window, which we know is really a joke because all it really does is it ends up being even more than a soft opening for free agency because all these deals have been agreed upon. But it does create a lot of excitement, certainly. Some drama even with Drew Brees, who ended up signing his 2-year deal with the Saints. But there were reports out there that other teams had reached out to try to talk to him. But
I remember last time Miami talked to him, it didn't work out well.
Yeah. Well, at that point, they were wondering if he would ever be able to throw football again adequately after that shoulder injury he had in San Diego way back when. But I think you've seen every year this has increasingly become the case of more and more agents and teams just, I think, frankly, not being worried about, quote, tampering or executing a contract before 4 p.m. on the start of free agency. I think you're seeing teams that are just more relaxed and agents that are more relaxed in the info they're putting out there. I mean, you have the NFL's media arm, NFL.com and NFL Network, flat out talking about players taking visits and coming to agreements. I mean, those are things that are specifically against the rules of this tampering window, and they're doing it anyway. So I think it shows, even though I know there have been a couple examples of teams that have been busted for tampering here over the last 5 or 6 years, I think for the most part we know what this is. I mean, the NFL is just trying to drum up more interest, more ratings, and really makes the actual official start pretty, not very exciting because most of the big names have come off the board. But I think of all the different signings and agreements that have come into play before the signing period officially begins, I think you got to look at Kirk Cousins getting a 3-year fully guaranteed contract with the Minnesota Vikings. And I mean, we've talked so long about the contract structure in the NFL. With the lack of guaranteed contracts, the lack of guarantees, all these deals that, quite frankly, have fake money. We've spent a lot of time talking about Ryan Grant. It's very well possible if he's a bust, he's not going to get $29 million over the next 4 years. He's going to get his guaranteed portion. He'll probably get about half of that. And we don't even know if that $14.5 million is fully guaranteed. Most of it's probably his signing bonus and his 2018 salary, and then probably has an injury guarantee for his next year's salary. But in the case of Kirk Cousins, who bet on himself in a way to a lesser degree than Joe Flacco, but still this guy played under the franchise tag for 2 years and had enough success, clearly made himself appealing, had put up enough, had enough production, had attractive enough numbers that some team has gone out there and said, okay, we're not gonna do the funny money kind of a deal where how much of it do you actually end up getting. We're going to fully guarantee you 3 years worth of salary, and it's just it's something that has been talked about for a long time, and now a quarterback has finally gotten it. And do I think the trickle down is all that significant for other players at other positions? No, but it is certainly significant when you're talking about the quarterback position now moving forward. So I think that, beyond the wide receiver money just being, quite frankly, stupid, ordinary wide receivers getting $7 or $8 million a year.
I go back 30 years, bro, to the Alvin Garrett signing in Tampa. You know what I mean? Excuse me, that was Alvin Garrett. I'm trying to think of who's the second
Alvin
one?
Harper.
Alvin Harper, my bad. Alvin
yeah.
Garrett was a Redskins. Alvin Harper signing in Tampa because the offense was incredible. The Cowboys were on top of the world. Michael Irvin was the best. Emmitt Smith was the best. Troy Aikman was the best. And you sign their wide receiver, and he's never heard from again, right? And you give him top dollar. And, that was sort of it was the beginning of free agency, too. It was the first time you had the opportunity to go out and give $5 million at that time to somebody else's wide receiver and bring them in. And, the curve on this for where Michael Jackson and Derek Alexander were one day and then where they were 2 years ago, later in a different offense with a different quarterback when Jim Harbaugh came in here and couldn't get the ball to them, it's a hard position to judge. It's obviously an incredibly hard position to draft for. And in a lot of cases, we sit there, and you and I 2 weeks ago were in Indianapolis in front of Colbert from the Steelers, and we almost wanted to ask him, why are you so good at this? And part of it may just be the way offenses work and the way wide receivers work. And, Torrey Smith in a purple uniform and Torrey Smith in a red and gold uniform, two different versions of Torrey Smith. And I would think that would be the same case for Mike Wallace, where he was a rock star in Pittsburgh and couldn't get out of his way in Minnesota or Miami, right?
Yeah, it certainly it comes down to variables. There's no question about that. But
it's not like hitting a baseball where Manny Machado is going to be able to do that in whatever uniform he's in or play shortstop. It's just a completely different level of comparison, I think, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. But at the same time, I don't think that argument supports some of these guys
giving Ryan Grant $7 million a year.
Well, and I'm not, and believe me, Ryan Grant's not the only one. I'm not just beating up the Ravens here. I'm looking at so many of these guys. I mentioned Albert Wilson. I'd barely even heard of Albert Wilson, and this guy's getting $8 million a year in Miami. We'll see. And to the point that you made, and that's an excellent point. And this was a big reason why, if you can recall, there were so many people saying over and over, Torrey Smith's not worth $8 million a year. Torrey Smith's not worth $8 million a year, and he leaves. And you see what the Ravens, the problems that they've had, and you see the lack of success that he's had elsewhere, and it really does speak to when you have a fit, as the Ravens had with Torrey Smith, for example, who, look, I get it, wasn't a dominant number one Julio Jones kind of a player by any stretch of the imagination, but he and Joe clearly had a rapport here in Baltimore. You didn't want to make to do that deal, and that was 3 years
look,
ago.
in retrospect, they should have drafted a linebacker instead of Perryman and paid Torrey Smith, right?
Or gone out and signed another receiver rather than just saying Torrey Smith's or Brashad Perriman's going to be Torrey Smith's replacement. But my point is, to what you said, it really does speak to how good of a fit there is. How much that wide receiver has that rapport with that quarterback.
And that's true for systems with Tim Jernigan, too, right, who never really fit what they were doing, right, and fits perfectly what Schwartz wants to do in Philly, and he becomes a better player and a guy that they give $40 million to, right?
Yeah, that one's a little more clear-cut in terms of, Tim Jernigan was just a better fit for a 4-3 system. He was a good player in Baltimore. A lot of people, that was still
But nobody saw him getting big money, I don't think.
Well, I think some people envisioned him getting a good contract. It's just the Ravens weren't going to be the team to do it after they had just invested money in Brandon Williams. You can't pay everyone at one position. So I think there were...
You tell Ben Grubbs that, too, right?
Yeah, there were definitely some circumstances there. But your point's well taken. There's definitely guys that are better fits in certain schemes, and you either build a rapport with your teammates around you or you don't. Jeremy Maclin is a guy that has had plenty of success in his career. He's not at an age where you would think he's completely done, but and a lot of it had to do with the fact that Joe Flacco wasn't on the field during training camp. It just didn't fit. It wasn't a good fit on a number of levels. And, how much of that was health, how much of that was personalities, I don't know. I think it's never just one thing. I think it was a number of things there. So the hope is that Ryan Grant can come in and be a hell of a possession receiver for Joe Flacco and give him that kind of a, quote, security blanket. But Ryan Grant's never really been that guy. I know this past year was productive on third down for Kirk Cousins. So maybe there's some, the Ravens saw that and thought that there's another level to that. We'll see, but so much of it comes to fit, and you hope this isn't a case of the Ravens got desperate because they didn't get any of the top line guys, and then second and third tier guys like Dante Moncrief, like Paul Richardson, and go down the list. Those guys started flying off the board, and you hope this wasn't just the case of the Ravens just flat out panicking, because if I'm going to overpay for someone, I want to overpay for at least a guy that's a known commodity. But in this case, this is a guy who doesn't even have 1,000 yards in his career, doesn't even have a 100-yard game in his career. And
everybody in Baltimore's waking up saying, "We signed who? A Redskin? What?"
Yeah, I mean, this is, like I said, considering the reputation that Ozzie Newsome and Eric DeCosta have, I can't recall a free agent signing that they've made
that's been off the radar.
That's been,
right?
quite frankly, panned by a lot of people already. I mean, that's the territory this is in. This isn't just fans complaining. They didn't get Allen Robinson, they didn't get Jarvis Landry, and now the fans are just ticked off and moaning about it. This is one of those where the reaction is stunned. People are stunned, people are surprised, people are confused, people don't get it. That's where this is. So, we'll see. But that said, in fairness to the Ravens, they're not the only team that is facing some criticism, some scrutiny, from some disbelief with some of the deals that have been out there. But the one area where the Ravens for years and years would stand out is they wouldn't be all that active in free agency, and you trusted their ability to draft. You trusted their ability to find free agent value later on after the signing period has begun. This year, they feel a lot more like everyone else in that department, and who knows? Maybe we're talking about Ryan Grant being a 1,000-yard receiver a year from now. We're talking about the fact that the Ravens really saw something late in his development in Washington to really set them apart. But we also know the history of this organization at the wide receiver position, and that's where they deserve some scrutiny for this. That's something that they have to wear, and they just have to hope that the player proves everyone wrong and shuts up their critics. And if that's the case, then great. But if we're talking about Ryan Grant having another 500-yard season, and a year from now we're still talking about them needing wide receivers, then we're going to look at this deal and be scratching our heads even more and saying, well, this might have been their version of an Ubaldo Jimenez signing, or an Andrew Kashner signing, or a Chris Tillman signing, who, by the way, was just dreadful in his first spring start.
Nestor Cortez, that's what we need. We need more Nestor is what we need.
Yeah.
All right, Luca, I'll let you breathe and get back to the internet and get back to Twitter and back to everything we're doing around here in spring training. He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at Howard Bank, a relentless commitment to be the best at everything they do. Branches now throughout Baltimore and Maryland, a unique hands-on approach to banking. Also our friends at Pizza John's, back Riverneck Road, 50 years. I drink out of the cup here. I wear the hat from time to time, but I definitely eat the pizza. Get on down there and see why they've been doing it 50 years. I've been doing it 50 years trying to make pizza that good. Instead, I just go there and get theirs. Maryland Jockey Club and our entries now in our morning newspaper delivered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com each and every morning at 7 a.m. Also on the front of our website, and yes, they are racing at Laurel this weekend. They're coming back to Pimlico soon. We'll be hi-ho, Pimlico, and get ready for all the bottomless cup and all that good stuff as well. If you're out gassing up, make sure you're doing that at Rofo. Download the Royal Farms app. Use that. Get free Western fries. Get free chicken. Get free coffee in the mornings, that tasty Kona blend. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, back with us as well. And there's one right around the corner from you. Luke can be found, Luke at WNST.net. I am Nasty at WNST.net. If there's any more pre- or post-tampering breaking news with the Ravens, as always, you'll get it first on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Of course, Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST. By the way, big news, breaking news. We are doing a swabbing, a conversation, and a hockey pre-playoff chat with head coach Barry Trotz of the Washington Capitals. That will be happening at Timonium's Michael's Cafe. On with us for the first time. I've been stalking him for 27 years. First-time sponsor, come on out. 34 years this week they've been doing it up there on York and Timonium Road across from the racetrack. Come on by. Homemade crab cakes. They're world famous. You know about that. The secret family recipe, as well as the delicious prime steaks. And they got that beautiful new patio. They're opening the deck. They got the fireplace. Michael's Cafe. That will happen on opening day, the 29th, after opening day. 7 o'clock at night, 7:30. We're going to get going with head coach Barry Trotz. Ed Frankovic will be with us. Come rock your red after you rock your orange on opening day with us up in Timonium at Michael's Cafe. We'll be telling you more about that. Ray Lewis trip on sale. Now on to our 4th bus for our Canton Hall of Fame weekend. Prices are about to go up $50, so act now if you want to before the weekend out at WNST.net. You can always email me. Find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.